The studio lights burned hot, white, and unforgiving, casting long, sharp shadows across the stage, as if truth itself might be dragged into the open by sheer force. The audience had been silent for nearly a full minute, the silence so tight, it seemed to hum, and then, before a word had even been spoken, Adam Schiff took a long breath, leaned forward across the debate table, and said with a calm that sliced through the air like a scalpel, "Robert, if you believe what you're saying, then tell America this. Would you trust your children's future to a lie you helped build?" The room trembled, not literally, but in the collective holding of breath, in the knowledge that something irreversible had just begun. Adam Schiff had been through countless hearings, investigations, and scandals, but nothing like this. This wasn't a hearing or a committee room. This was prime time, national TV, lights, cameras, 100 million Americans watching. This was his last stand, though he hadn't said it aloud, not even to himself. He was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the bone-deep kind. The kind that creeps in when you've spent years fighting upstream, watching truth be distorted, justice be diluted, and public trust bleed out by the gallon. At 65, his grey had overtaken his once black hair, and the lines on his face had deepened it from age, but from carrying the weight of his convictions. But conviction was something he still had plenty of. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., on the other hand, had a different kind of magnetism, a legacy name, a voice made gravelly from years of environmental litigation, and eyes that carried both defiance and grief. He hadn't come to the stage to lose. He believed in what he stood for, at least. He believed in the idea of belief. His campaign had surged not because of party loyalty, but because of a strange cocktail of nostalgia, outsider appeal, and a deep-seated public craving for someone who seemed to feel their anger. But beneath his certainty was something fragile, a shadow. He had lived in the echoes of assassinations, of myths, of a family name that carried more ghosts than glory. His father had been shot before he could become president. His uncle, too. Every time he entered a room with his last name, people didn't see him, they saw what could have been, or worse, what never was. And now, he had turned that weight into momentum, into rebellion, into a presidential campaign. And this debate, this night, wasn't just a policy clash. It was to America's embodied. Schiff, the institutionalist. Kennedy, the iconoclast. Both men scarred by history. Both convinced the country stood on a ledge. The moderators asked the usual questions. The economy, foreign policy, the climate. Answers came, each measured, calculated, sparring, but civil. Yet the real question, the real tension, waited like a wolf at the door. It came halfway through, wrapped innocuously in a question about misinformation and public health. The moderator asked about trust. Trust in institutions, trust in science, trust in democracy. And that's when Schiff leaned forward and spoke. That single loaded sentence, Kennedy blinked. There was something in his expression just for a moment that flickered. Doubt, shame, recognition. Then came his answer. I trust the American people to decide for themselves. Polite applause, but the air had changed. That sentence on its surface, reasonable, wasn't new. It had been used for years as a shield against accountability. But tonight, framed by Schiff's challenge, it sounded different. Hollow, deflective. A young woman in the audience, Erica Banks, a science teacher from Columbus, watched with narrowed eyes. Her father had died during the pandemic, a victim of disinformation, convinced by online sources that vaccines were poison. She hadn't come to the debate to pick a side, but something inside her began to shift. That was one subplot Erica's journey. We'll come back to her. The second was a young campaign staffer, Jonah Rivera, who worked for Kennedy. 27, idealistic, brilliant with data, but haunted by the sense that they were losing the moral high ground. He had joined the campaign because he believed in challenging the status quo. But he hadn't expected the lies to be so subtle, or the truths to be so inconvenient. As the debate wore on, the audience saw a transformation. Schiff, who had started stiff and policy-heavy, began to tell stories. Real ones, about his childhood in Framingham. About a neighbor who had escaped tyranny, only to find herself disillusioned in modern-day America. About a soldier who emailed him from a base in Syria, afraid not of the enemy outside, but of the division inside. He wasn't quoting statistics anymore, he was speaking from a deeper place, grief perhaps, or love. The line blurred, and Kennedy, for all his charisma, started to repeat himself. The passion was there, but it began to feel rehearsed, like he was fighting ghosts instead of opponents. He brought up his father, his uncle, and then, startlingly, he brought up his cousin, John Jr. and said, "We were meant to finish what they started, we have to." It was a raw moment, but something about it felt off. Schiff didn't pounce, he paused, then he said softly, "Robert, the American people don't need a resurrection. They need a future. Built on truth, not martyrdom." The crowd didn't cheer, they just listened. And somewhere backstage, Jonah Rivera felt something inside him crack. He left the green room, pulled out his phone, and started typing a resignation letter. It wouldn't go viral that night, but it would, a few days later. A quiet rebellion. Erica Banks, meanwhile, returned home and wrote a blog post. It wasn't eloquent, but it was raw and real. "I saw my dad tonight," she wrote. "Not on stage. In the silence between two men who've lost too much." As the debate neared its end, both men were asked what kind of America they saw 10 years from now. Kennedy spoke first. He painted a picture of decentralization, of community strength, of medical freedom and sovereign choice. The crowd clapped, some of them standing. Then Schiff. He took his time, looked out at the audience, not with charisma, but with something heavier. He didn't promise prosperity or healing. He said, "I don't know what America will look like, but I know what I'll fight for. A country where truth doesn't need a filter, and justice doesn't depend on who you voted for. That's all I can promise. That's all any of us should." When the lights dimmed and the credits rolled, no winner was declared. No knockout punch had been thrown. But across social media, one clip was played again and again. That single sentence. Schiff's question, "Would you trust your children's future to a lie you helped build?" It became more than a quote, it became a mirror. In the days that followed, polls shifted but not wildly. What changed more was the conversation. People stopped debating facts and started debating values. The country, long divided, suddenly found itself talking not about sides but about stakes. Jonah's resignation went viral. Erica's blog post was turned into an op-ed. Kennedy's campaign didn't end, but it softened. He issued a rare statement, acknowledging that the past, no matter how noble, cannot be the sole blueprint for our future. And Schiffy didn't run for president. He said debates like that one were his purpose now. Conversations that hurt, that opened wounds, that maybe, just maybe, helped them heal. In the end, it wasn't about Schiff or Kennedy. It was about what happens when truth is spoken plainly in a room full of noise. When one sentence cuts through ideology and lands, not like a weapon, but like a lifeline. The lesson. Sometimes, we don't need louder voices. We need braver ones. And sometimes, one sentence honest, unscripted, and aimed not at winning, but at waking us up really, can change everything.